2 months after I buried my best friend Marcus, his lawyer handed me a USB drive and said something that made my blood run cold. He told me that Marcus left strict instructions to give me this drive only if I was still alive 60 days after his funeral. If I had died before today, he was supposed to hand it directly to the homicide detectives. I sat in my car with the rain hammering against the roof and plugged it into my laptop. I expected a goodbye message or a video will. Instead, I saw Marcus looking thin and pale, attached to oxygen tubes, staring right into the camera with terrified eyes. Thomas, if you are watching this, it means you are in grave danger. My wife did not die of natural causes, and neither did I. And the person who killed us is currently sleeping in your bed. What he revealed in that final video not only saved my life, but exposed a monster hiding behind a beautiful face. Before I continue this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that true friendship lasts even beyond death. And let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support helps me share these difficult truths. My name is Thomas Sterling. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I built a logistics empire here in Seattle. I have negotiated with union leaders, faced down bankruptcy, and survived economic crashes. I thought I knew how to spot a liar. I thought I knew how to protect what was mine. But as I sat in the leather chair of Harrison's office that Tuesday afternoon, I realized I had been blind. Harrison has been my lawyer for decades. He is a man who never shows emotion, a man who wears three-piece suits even on weekends. But that day his hands were shaking as he held a small manila envelope. The sound of the rain hitting the window pane was the only noise in the room for a long time. Harrison cleared his throat and looked at me with an expression I could not quite place. It looked like pity mixed with fear. "Thomas," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Marcus came to see me 3 days before he passed. He was in a wheelchair, and he could barely speak. He made me swear on my license that I would follow his instructions to the letter." He pushed the envelope across the mahogany desk toward me. Inside was a simple black USB drive. It looked innocuous, just a piece of plastic. But Harrison treated it like it was a loaded gun. "The condition was specific, Thomas. He said to wait exactly 2 months. He said that if you were still with us, I should give this to you. But if you had passed away from a heart attack or a stroke, I was to take this evidence to the police immediately." My heart skipped a beat. A heart attack. A stroke. Those were the exact things my doctor had warned me about just last week. I reached out and took the drive. The plastic felt cold against my fingertips. Harrison stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to me. "I do not know what is on that drive, Thomas," he said softly. "But whatever it is, Marcus used his last breath to ensure it got to you. Go home. Watch it alone. Do not tell Vanessa." The mention of my wife's name made me pause. Vanessa. My beautiful, devoted Vanessa. She was 18 years younger than me. A former nurse who had nursed me back to health after a car accident 20 years ago. We had a good life. Or so I thought. Why would Marcus warn me not to tell her I walked out of the office and into the gray, relentless Seattle drizzle? I did not go home. I could not. Instead, I drove my car to a secluded spot overlooking the Puget Sound. The water was choppy and dark, reflecting the turmoil in my gut. I opened my laptop and inserted the drive. My hands were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from a creeping sense of dread. There was only one file. It was simply titled, "The Truth." I clicked play. The screen flickered to life. The video was grainy, clearly recorded on a webcam in a dimly lit room. It was Marcus's bedroom. I recognized the painting on the wall behind him. Marcus looked terrible. His skin was yellowed, his eyes sunken. He had an oxygen tube in his nose. He took a ragged breath and leaned close to the camera. "Thomas," he rasped. "Listen to me carefully. I do not have much time. The doctors say it is aggressive liver cancer. They say it happens fast. They are lying, or rather they are being lied to. I looked closer at the screen. Marcus's eyes were filled with tears. I am being poisoned, Thomas, and I know who is doing it. I just cannot prove it yet. I have been tracking my symptoms, the numbness in my fingers, the hair loss, the sudden vomiting. It is thallium, Thomas. It is an odorless, tasteless, heavy metal. I gasped aloud in the empty car. Thallium, the poisoner's poison. Marcus continued, his voice gaining a sudden intensity. It is Vanessa. She and my wife were closer than we thought. I found messages, I found transfers. They have been planning this for years. They practiced on me first. And you are next. Do not eat anything she prepares. Do not take the pills she gives you. Run, Thomas. Run before you end up like me. The video ended abruptly, leaving me in silence. I sat there staring at the black screen, my mind racing back to Marcus's funeral 2 months ago. I remembered Vanessa standing by the grave holding my arm. She was wearing a black veil and sobbing uncontrollably. Everyone whispered about what a saint she was, how she supported me through the loss of my best friend. She had held me tight that night, whispering that she would take care of me, that I was all she had left. Take care of me. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest. I instinctively clutched my shirt. For the past month I had been feeling unusually tired. My heart would race for no reason. My fingertips felt tingly in the mornings. I had dismissed it as grief. I dismissed it as the toll of being 70 years old. I went to my doctor, Dr. Gavin Reed, and he told me it was just stress. He gave me new medication. He told me to let Vanessa manage my diet because she was a nurse. A wave of nausea hit me that had nothing to do with illness. It was the sickness of betrayal. The woman I had shared my bed with for 20 years. The woman I had written into my will as the sole beneficiary of my $18 million estate. Was she slowly killing me? I looked out at the rain, washing down the windshield, distorting the world outside. I felt like a fool. A rich old fool who had fallen for the oldest trick in the book. The young nurse and the wealthy patient. I clenched my fists. Marcus was dead. My best friend was gone because he didn't realize the truth until it was too late. But he had given me a chance. He had given me a weapon. Just then, the silence of the car was shattered by a loud ringing. I jumped, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the phone screen on the passenger seat. The caller ID flashed a photo of a smiling woman. It said, "My love." It was Vanessa. I stared at the phone for a long moment, letting it ring. Every ring felt like a warning bell. Finally, I picked it up and swiped answer, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello," I said. Thomas, honey, her voice was sweet, cloyingly sweet. "Where are you? You have been gone for hours. The weather is terrible and I was getting worried about your heart. I am just finishing up some paperwork," I lied, my eyes still fixed on the dark laptop screen. "I will be home soon." "Good," she purred. "Hurry back. I just made a fresh batch of that herbal smoothie Dr. Gavin recommended. It is warm and ready for you. You need to drink it while it is fresh to get the full benefit." I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked back at me hard and cold. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold fury. She was waiting for me. She had the poison ready. She thought she was talking to a helpless old man who would drink whatever she gave him. She was wrong. Thomas Sterling was not dead yet. I started the engine. The engine roared to life, a sound of power and resistance. I was going home, but I was not going home to die. I was going home to hunt. The garage door closed behind me with a heavy mechanical thud, sealing me inside the place I had called home for 15 years. But as I sat in the driver's seat for a moment longer, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the house felt different. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a hunting ground, and I was the prey. This $4 million mansion overlooking Lake Washington, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and heated marble floors, was just a gilded cage. I took a deep breath, composing my face. I had to be the Thomas Sterling she expected, the tired, aging husband who was grateful for her youth and care. I could not let her see the fire burning in my chest. I opened the car door and stepped into the mudroom, hanging my wet coat on the hook. "Honey, is that you?" Vanessa's voice floated from the kitchen. It was light and melodic, the kind of voice that used to soothe my headaches after long board meetings. Now it sounded like a siren call luring a sailor onto the rocks. "I am home, darling," I called back, forcing a lightness into my tone that felt foreign to my tongue. I walked into the kitchen. The space was immaculate. White quartz countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting. And there she was, Vanessa. At 52, she was still breathtaking. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and she was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She turned to me with that perfect smile, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes just enough to look genuine. But for the first time, I looked past the song, past the smile. I looked at her hands. She was holding a tall glass filled with a thick, opaque green liquid. "Just in time," she said, walking over to place a kiss on my cheek. Her lips felt cold. "I made your special blend. Kale spinach and that herbal supplement Dr. Gavin insisted you take for your heart. It smells a bit strong today, but you know what they say. The worse it tastes, the better it works." She handed me the glass. I took it, and the weight of it felt substantial in my hand. It was cold, and condensation beaded on the outside. I brought it closer to my face, pretending to inspect it, but really I was sniffing it. Underneath the scent of raw vegetables, there was something else. A faint, sweet aroma. Bitter almonds. My stomach churned. It smelled exactly like the chemical compound Emily had described. It smelled like death disguised as health. "Drink up, Thomas," she urged, gently touching my arm. Her fingers lingered on my pulse point. Was she checking my heart rate? Was she seeing if the fear had spiked my blood pressure? "You look pale." Was the meeting with Harrison stressful? The interrogation had begun. I knew I had to tread carefully. One wrong word, and she would know I was onto her. I lowered the glass slightly, holding it at chest level. "It was tedious," I said, letting out a long, exaggerated sigh. "You know how lawyers are." Harrison found some irregularities in the tax filings for the logistics company from 5 years ago. He wanted to go over the audit trails before the fiscal year ends. "It is nothing serious, just a lot of paperwork." I watched her face closely. I was looking for the crack in the porcelain mask. For a fraction of a second, her eyes narrowed. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. Her smile didn't fade, but the warmth in her eyes vanished instantly, leaving them flat and calculating. She was analyzing my lie. She knew I usually complained about taxes with more anger. Today I was too calm. "Taxes," she repeated slowly, tilting her head. "That is strange. I thought you said Harrison called you about something personal. Something regarding Marcus." My heart hammered against my ribs. She was testing me. She knew exactly why Harrison had called, because she was likely terrified of what Marcus might have left behind. "He did mention Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He wanted to know if we wanted to buy Marcus's share of the lake house property, since the estate is being liquidated." The tension in her shoulders dropped by an inch. She bought it. Or at least she accepted it as a plausible truth. "Oh, I see," she said, turning back to the stove where a pot of soup was simmering. "Well, we can talk about that later. Drink your smoothie before it separates. The sediment settles at the bottom, and that is where all the nutrients are. All the poison, you mean." I watched her back. She was stirring the soup, humming a soft tune. It was now or never. I was standing near the large bay window that looked out over the garden. On the windowsill sat a large potted Boston fern. It was a massive plant that we had bought together 3 years ago. It used to be lush and vibrant, a symbol of life in this sterile kitchen. I looked at the glass in my hand. Then I looked at Vanessa's back. With a swift, silent motion, I tipped the glass, pouring the thick green sludge directly into the center of the fern's pot. The soil absorbed it greedily. That was when I noticed it. I had not looked closely at this plant in weeks. Vanessa always claimed she took care of it. But as the liquid sank into the dirt, I saw the state of the fern. The fronds near the base were not just brown, they were black. The stems looked shriveled, as if they had been burned from the inside out. The soil had a strange white crust on the surface. A realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not the first time I had poured my drink here. A few times in the past month, when I just didn't have the appetite, I had dumped the smoothie here to avoid upsetting Vanessa. I thought the plant was just having a bad season. But now I knew. I had been killing this plant with the very poison meant for me. The thallium was accumulating in the soil, burning the roots. This innocent fern was the only reason I was not yet in a hospital bed like Marcus. It had taken the brunt of the toxicity. I felt a surge of rage so hot, it almost blinded me. I stared at the dying plant, a mirror of what was happening to my own internal organs. She had been doing this for months, slowly, methodically. Thomas. I spun around. Vanessa had turned back from the stove faster than I anticipated. I hid the empty glass behind my back, but it was too late. She had seen the motion. "You finished it already?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. I forced myself to swallow the bile rising in my throat. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. Yes, I lied. I gulped it down. "Like you said, best to get it over with." She stared at me. She did not blink. Her gaze traveled from my face to the empty glass in my hand, and then over my shoulder to the fern on the windowsill. Did she see the wet soil? Did she suspect? The silence stretched out thick and suffocating. The only sound was the rain tapping against the glass and the frantic beating of my own heart. "You must have been thirsty," she said softly, taking a step toward me. Her eyes were locked onto mine, searching for any sign of deception. "Usually you complain about the texture. Usually you leave half of it." I decided to take care of my health. "Vanessa," I said, stepping forward to meet her challenge, "I want to be around for a long time." She stopped. A strange, unreadable expression crossed her face. Then the perfect smile returned, but this time it didn't reach her eyes at all. "I am glad to hear that, Thomas," she said, "because I made a double batch today. Since you liked it so much, would you like another glass?" She gestured to the pitcher on the counter, still half full of the deadly green liquid. She was calling my bluff. If I truly drank it and liked it, I would accept more. If I refused, she would know I dumped it. I stood there trapped in my own kitchen, staring at the pitcher that held my death sentence, while my wife watched me with the eyes of a predator, waiting for the trap to snap shut. The next morning, the ceiling of my bedroom seemed to be spinning slowly, like a lazy ceiling fan, even though the fixture above me was perfectly still. I sat up and gripped the edge of the mattress, waiting for the wave of nausea to pass. I had not touched this green smoothie the night before, but the residual effects of whatever Vanessa had been feeding me for weeks were still coursing through my veins. My fingertips felt numb, as if I had been sleeping on my hands all night, and there was a dull, persistent ache behind my eyes. I knew I needed medical attention, but I could not go to the hospital. If I checked into a hospital, Vanessa would be notified immediately as my next of kin. She would rush to my bedside playing the worried wife, and she would control the narrative. No, I had to play this game carefully. I had to go to the source. I dressed slowly, buttoning my shirt with fumbling fingers that lacked their usual dexterity, and drove to the private clinic of Dr. Gavin Reed. The clinic was located in one of the most expensive medical parks in Seattle, a place where the landscaping was manicured to perfection, and the waiting room looked more like the lobby of a five-star hotel than a doctor's office. I had paid for the renovation of this wing 2 years ago, a donation Gavin had solicited over a golf game. Walking in now, I saw my name on a brass plaque by the door, the Sterling Wing. It felt like a cruel joke. I was the benefactor of the very place where my murder was being orchestrated. The receptionist smiled brightly and ushered me straight back. VIP treatment for the man whose bank account was about to be drained. Gavin was waiting in exam room B. He looked the part of the trustworthy physician perfectly. He was 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair that was carefully styled, and he wore a crisp white coat that seemed to repel dirt. He was washing his hands when I entered, and he turned with that easy, charming smile that had fooled me for a decade. "Thomas," he said, drying his hands on a paper towel. "To what do I owe the pleasure? You are not due for your checkup until next month." I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table, trying to keep my posture upright, despite the dizziness. "I am not feeling right, Gavin," I said, keeping my voice level. "My heart races at night. My hands are numb. I feel like I am walking through a fog." Gavin approached me, pulling his stethoscope from around his neck. He placed the cold metal disc against my chest and listened for a moment, his face a mask of professional concentration. Then he moved it to my back. "Breathe in, breathe out." He went through the motions, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. He was not looking for a diagnosis, he was checking to see if the dosage was effective. He pulled the stethoscope away and folded his arms, leaning against the counter. "Thomas, your heart sounds a little erratic, but that is to be expected," he said, his tone condescendingly reassuring. "We discussed this. You are 70 years old. Your body is slowing down. The symptoms you are describing are classic signs of anxiety and age-related circulation issues." I looked at him, fighting the urge to grab him by the throat. Anxiety. That was the catch-all excuse. "It does not feel like anxiety," I pressed. "It feels like I am being poisoned." The word hung in the air for a second. Gavin did not flinch. He did not look shocked. Instead, he let out a short, dismissive laugh, the kind one might use with a child who claims to see a monster under the bed. "Poisoned," he repeated, shaking his head with a pitying smile. "You sound just like him." "Like who?" I asked, my hands balling into fists on my lap. "Like Marcus," he said. The mention of my best friend's name made the blood roar in my ears. Gavin walked over to his desk and picked up a file, flipping through it casually. Toward the end, Marcus was not just sick, Thomas. He was losing his mind. He told me people were watching him. He told me his food tasted funny. He died of liver cancer. But paranoia is what really killed his spirit before his body gave out. Do not go down that road, Thomas. Do not let grief turn you into a conspiracy theorist. Vanessa is a saint for putting up with this. She calls me every day, worried sick about you, and here you are, suspecting the worst. It took every ounce of my willpower not to scream." He was insulting the memory of the man he had helped kill. He was gaslighting me, using my dead friend as a weapon to silence my instincts. I looked at Gavin's face, the smug arrogance in his eyes, and I realized he did not just see me as a patient. He saw me as a walking ATM that was about to dispense its final payout. "I will try to relax," I managed to say, forcing my muscles to unclench. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I just need rest." "Good," Gavin said, closing the file with a snap. "I am going to prepare a booster shot for you. Just a high-dose vitamin cocktail, B12 and magnesium. It will clear up that brain fog and help with the numbness. Sit tight. I will be right back." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard. Vitamins. I knew better. If I let him inject me with whatever was in that syringe, I might not make it home. I might have that heart attack they had been predicting. I slid off the exam table. My legs felt heavy, but adrenaline was sharpening my senses. I moved toward his desk. I did not know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe a note, maybe a file. My eyes scanned the messy surface. There were patient charts, pharmaceutical samples, and a stack of mail that had been opened, but not yet filed. My gaze landed on a piece of thick, cream-colored paper near the bottom of the stack. It was an invoice. I recognized the logo instantly because I had stayed at that hotel years ago on a business trip, the Hotel Plaza Athénée in Paris. It was one of the most expensive hotels in the world. I reached out and carefully slid the paper out from under the pile. The invoice was under Gavin's name, but it was for a suite, a honeymoon suite to be exact. I looked at the dates, November 12th to November 18th of last year. My breath hitched in my throat. November. Last November, Vanessa had told me she was going to a charity retreat in Vermont to build houses for the homeless. She had sent me photos of snowy landscapes and rustic cabins. But here was the truth in black and white. While I was sitting at home missing my wife, she was in Paris with my doctor drinking champagne in a suite that cost $5,000 a night. I looked closer at the itemized bill. Room service for 2, spa treatments for 2, and a charge for a jewelry boutique in the lobby. A Cartier bracelet. I remembered that bracelet. Vanessa had come home wearing it, claiming it was a thank you gift from the charity organizers for her hard work. I had been so proud of her. I had bragged to my friends about how generous my wife was. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the poison. I was not just a victim, I was a laughingstock. They were not just killing me, they were living a life of luxury on my dime while they planned my funeral. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it left me feeling hollowed out. I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. The heavy, confident strides of Dr. Gavin Reed. I quickly slid the invoice back under the stack, trying to align it exactly as it had been. I scrambled back to the exam table and hopped up just as the door swung open. Gavin walked in holding a small silver tray. On it was a syringe filled with a clear liquid and an alcohol wipe. He was smiling that same predatory smile. "Ready for your boost?" he asked, tapping the syringe to clear an air bubble. "This will make you feel like a new man, Thomas." I looked at the needle. The liquid inside looked innocent enough, just like the water in a vase, but I knew it was the next step in their plan. If he injected that directly into my bloodstream, the concentration of thallium would spike. I might collapse right here in his office, and he would simply call it a cardiac event. He would sign the death certificate himself. I could not take that shot. But I could not refuse it without raising suspicion. If I said no, he would call Vanessa. He would tell her I was being difficult, and she would double the dose in my food tonight. I needed an out. I needed a lie that was believable for a grumpy old man. I looked at my watch and feigned a sudden panic. "Oh, damn it!" I exclaimed, patting my pockets. "What is wrong?" Gavin asked, pausing with the needle mid-air. "My phone," I said. "I left it in the car. I am expecting a call from the auditors in 5 minutes. If I miss it, they will freeze the company accounts. You know how the IRS is." Gavin looked annoyed. "Can it not wait 5 minutes, Thomas? This will be quick." "No," I said, jumping off the table and grabbing my jacket. "You do not understand. This is an $18 million audit. I cannot miss this call. I will run out and grab it and come right back. Keep that warm for me." Before he could protest further, I was already moving toward the door. I moved faster than a 70-year-old man with heart failure should be able to move. I pushed past him, ignoring the confused look on his face. "I will be right back, Gavin," I called over my shoulder. I walked briskly down the hallway past the smiling receptionist and out into the cool gray morning. I did not stop at my car to get my phone. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the gear shift. I backed out of the parking space and peeled out of the lot, leaving the Sterling wing behind me. I checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Gavin running after me with the syringe, but the lot was empty. I had bought myself some time, maybe an hour, maybe 2 before he called Vanessa to ask why I had not returned. But I had what I needed, I had confirmation. They were lovers. They were partners in crime. And they were sloppy. The invoice, the hotel, the dates. It was a paper trail. And if there was one thing Thomas Sterling knew how to handle, it was a paper trail. I was not going home yet. I had one more stop to make. A stop that would arm me for the war that was coming tonight. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 times, echoing through the silent house like a death knell. I lay in the center of our king-sized bed, my body rigid under the heavy duvet. For the last hour, I had been performing the most difficult acting role of my life. I had to breathe deeply and rhythmically, mimicking the heavy slumber of an old man while my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every muscle in my body wanted to twitch, to run, to fight, but I forced myself to remain paralyzed. I knew she was coming. I could feel it in the air, a shift in the pressure of the room. The door handle to the bedroom turned slowly. It was a faint metallic click that would have been inaudible to anyone actually asleep, but to me it sounded like a gunshot. I kept my eyes shut, but my other senses went into overdrive. I heard the soft brush of silk against the doorframe. I smelled her perfume, a scent of jasmine and vanilla that I used to find intoxicating, but now smelled like funeral flowers. Vanessa was in the room. She moved silently across the plush carpet. I focused on keeping my breathing even, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. She stopped right beside my side of the bed. I could feel her body heat radiating near my face. Then I felt her hand. Her fingers were cold as they lightly touched my neck, searching for my carotid artery. She was checking my pulse. It took everything I had not to flinch, not to grab her wrist and snap it. She lingered there for a long moment, analyzing the strength of my heartbeat, calculating how much life was left in me. Finally, she pulled her hand away. I heard the soft tap of a screen, and the dim light of a cell phone bled through my eyelids. She walked toward the window away from the bed, but the room was so quiet I could hear her whisper. "He is out cold," she said, her voice low and devoid of any warmth. "The sedative in the tea worked. But his pulse is still too strong, Gavin." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. My blood ran cold. She was talking to my doctor. My executioners were holding a conference call while I lay 3 feet away. I know she hissed a hint of impatience in her tone, but I do not want to drag this out for another month. The old man is tougher than we thought. His heart is like an ox. I think we need to increase the dosage. If we double it tomorrow night, we could trigger the event by the weekend. She listened again, and then let out a soft, cruel laugh. "Do not worry about the autopsy," she whispered. "You are the one signing the death certificate, remember? Just make sure you have the paperwork ready. I want the cremation done within 24 hours. No loose ends." She hung up the phone. I heard her walk back toward the bed. She stood over me for one last second, a silent predator admiring her kill. Then she turned and walked out, closing the door with a soft click. I waited. I counted to 100, slowly forcing myself to be sure she was truly gone. Then I opened my eyes. The room was bathed in shadows, but the darkness felt safer than her presence. I sat up, gasping for air, wiping the cold sweat from my forehead. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Cremation within 24 hours. That was the key. They knew thallium stays in the bone marrow and hair for years. They needed to burn the evidence before anyone asked questions. I threw off the covers and swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet. I had to move fast. Vanessa usually took a shower in the guest bathroom down the hall at night, claiming my snoring kept her awake, but really, it was to give her privacy for her schemes. That gave me maybe 15 minutes. I crept toward the master bathroom, the private sanctuary she had claimed as her own territory over the years. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of antiseptic and expensive lotions. The moonlight filtered through the frosted glass window, illuminating the marble countertops. I went straight for the trash bin tucked under the sink. Vanessa was a creature of habit. As a former nurse, she was meticulous about hygiene, but she was also arrogant. She believed I was a senile old fool who would never think to look through her garbage. I knelt on the cold tiles, my knees protesting, and stepped on the pedal. The lid popped open. Inside it was a mess of cotton pads, makeup wipes, and empty moisturizer tubes. I gritted my teeth and reached in, moving the cosmetic waste aside. My fingers brushed against something hard and plastic at the bottom. I pulled it out. It was a small amber glass vial. It was empty. The label had been scraped off, but not completely. There were sticky residue marks where she had tried to peel it away with her fingernails. I held it up to the moonlight, squinting at the faint print that remained on the adhesive. Most of the letters were gone, but a fragment remained near the bottom edge. It read, Ju M, followed by a skull and crossbones symbol that was barely visible. I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants, where I had hidden the burner phone Emily had given me. I turned the brightness down to the lowest setting and typed the letters into the search bar. LLIUM poison. The search results loaded instantly. The first word that appeared punched me in the gut. Thallium. I clicked on the link, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Thallium sulfate. Known historically as the poisoner's poison due to being odorless and tasteless. Symptoms include hair loss, numbness in the extremities, abdominal pain, and tachycardia. It works by destroying the body's cellular transport systems, effectively starving the organs of energy. It mimics a natural decline or a heart condition, making it nearly impossible to detect without a specific toxicology screen. I looked at my hand holding the phone. The numbness in my fingertips was not from the cold. It was the cells dying. I touched my head, remembering the extra hair I had seen in the shower drain this morning. It all matched. Every single symptom. She was not just killing me, she was dismantling me cell by cell. It was a slow, torturous murder designed to look like a tragedy. I sat back on my heels, staring at the little glass vial. This was it. The smoking gun. This bottle had contained the substance that was currently coursing through my veins. If I could get this to Emily, she could analyze the residue. We would have proof not just of poisoning, but of premeditation. I grabbed a tissue and carefully wrapped the vial to preserve any fingerprints. Vanessa's prints would be all over it. This little piece of glass was my ticket to survival and her ticket to prison. I stood up, feeling a surge of triumph mixed with terror. I had to get back to bed. I had to hide this. Suddenly, I froze. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps. Not the soft, prowling steps of earlier, but the quick, purposeful stride of someone who had forgotten something. They were getting louder. Closer. I looked at the bathroom door. I had left it slightly ajar just as it was, but I was still inside. There was no other way out. The window was sealed shut and painted over. The footsteps stopped right outside the master bedroom door. I heard the handle turn again. Panic flared in my chest, hot and blinding. I looked around the bathroom for a hiding spot. The shower. No glass doors. The closet. Too far. I heard the bedroom door open. Thomas? Vanessa's voice called out, sharp and questioning. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold, tiled wall behind the door. I clutched the wrapped vial to my chest. I heard her walk into the bedroom. Silence. She was looking at the empty bed. Thomas, where are you? She called again, her voice rising in pitch. I heard her movement shift toward the bathroom. She knew. She knew I wasn't in bed, and there was only one place I could be. I watched the shadow of her feet appear in the gap under the bathroom door. The handle of the bathroom door began to turn slowly. I was trapped. I was an old man in pajamas holding the evidence of my own murder, standing 3 feet away from the woman who wanted me dead. And there was nowhere left to run. I managed to survive the night by locking myself in the bathroom and flushing the toilet repeatedly, claiming a violent reaction to seafood. But as the sun rose over the gray skyline of Seattle, I knew my time was truly running out. I told Vanessa through the door that I was going for a long drive to clear my head, and before she could object or offer me another poisoned cup of tea, I was in my car speeding away from the mansion that had become my execution chamber. I was not driving aimlessly. I was heading to a part of the city I had not visited in years, a neighborhood of peeling paint and rusted chain-link fences in the Rainier Valley. I was looking for Emily. For years, Vanessa had told me that Marcus's daughter was a lost cause. She told me Emily was a heroin addict who had stolen money from her own father, and that we had to cut her off for her own good. I had believed her. I had let my best friend die, believing his only child was a criminal who did not love him. God forgive me for my blindness. I pulled up to a crumbling brick building that looked like it had been condemned years ago. The buzzer for apartment 4B was taped over with a handwritten name tag that simply read, "Ah, Vance." I pressed it and waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from the poison this time, but from pure shame. When the voice crackled through the intercom, it was not slurred or aggressive as I had been led to expect. It was sharp, clear, and weary. "Who is it?" "It is Thomas Sterling," I said into the speaker. "Marcus's friend." There was a long, heavy silence before the buzzer buzzed loudly, unlocking the heavy iron door. I walked up the 4 flights of stairs, smelling stale cigarette smoke and boiled cabbage in the hallway. When the door opened at the top of the landing, I did not see the ravaged face of an addict. I saw a young woman in an oversized university sweatshirt, with dark circles under her intelligent eyes, holding a thick textbook titled Advanced Toxicology. "Thomas," she said, guarding the doorway with a defensive posture. "What are you doing here? Did she send you to make sure I was not coming to the funeral to cause a scene?" I looked past her into the small studio apartment. It was cramped and freezing cold, but it was meticulously tidy. There were no needles, no drug paraphernalia. Instead, there were stacks of books everywhere. Organic chemistry, molecular biology, forensic pathology. The walls were covered in sticky notes and complex chemical diagrams. "May I come in, Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "I think I made a terrible mistake." She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of deception. Then she stepped back. I walked into her world. It was a world of poverty, but also of fierce intellectual determination. She cleared a stack of papers off a wobbly chair for me to sit. "I am finishing my master's degree in forensic science," she said, seeing me stare at the books. "I work 2 shifts at a diner to pay for it." "I am not what she told you, Thomas. I never was. Vanessa planted those pills in my room 5 years ago. She convinced my dad I was using so he would kick me out. She needed him isolated. She needed him alone so no one would notice he was getting sick." I sat down and covered my face with my hands. The realization of our cruelty washed over me. We had abandoned this brilliant young woman because of the lies of a sociopath. "Marcus knew," I whispered through my fingers. "In the end, he knew. He left me a video, Emily. He told me everything." Emily sank onto the edge of her bed. Her toughness evaporated, and suddenly she was just a grieving daughter who missed her dad. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking. I reached out and took her hand. It was rough from hard work, but warm. We sat there for a long time, 2 survivors in a sea of wreckage. But we did not have time for tears. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small glass vial I had retrieved from the trash and a lock of my own hair I had cut this morning. "I think she is doing it to me too," I said. Emily wiped her eyes and instantly shifted into professional mode. She took the vial and the hair sample, handling them with the care of a surgeon. She moved to a small desk in the corner that served as her makeshift laboratory. She pulled out a small kit of reagents and test tubes. I watched her work. She was precise and methodical. She scraped a tiny bit of residue from the vial and mixed it with a clear solution. Then she added a drop of something else. The room went silent as we watched the liquid. It turned a muddy brown, then slowly shifted to a deep, menacing purple. Emily gasped and stepped back, knocking a pencil off the desk. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "It is positive," she said, her voice shaking. "This is thallium, Thomas. And judging by the reaction time, the concentration is lethal." She turned to my hair sample, putting it under a cheap microscope she had set up. She adjusted the lens, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she looked up at me and her face was pale. "You are at level 2 toxicity," she said. "The bands in your hair show consistent ingestion over the last 3 weeks. But the residue in this vial is much stronger. If you continue to ingest this even for 2 more weeks, your nervous system will shut down. You won't just have a heart attack, Thomas. You will suffocate because your body will forget how to breathe." 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to live. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Then I need to go to the police," I said. "I have the vial. I have the video." "No," Emily said sharply, standing up to block my path. "It is not enough. The vial was in the trash. It is circumstantial. She will say you planted it. She will say my dad was hallucinating from the cancer drugs. Vanessa is smart, Thomas. If you go to the police now, she will lawyer up and she will get away with it. She will inherit your millions and disappear to Europe." She went to a drawer and pulled out a small blue bottle and a tiny black device that looked like a button. She handed me the blue bottle first. "This is Prussian blue," she explained. "It is an industrial pigment, but it binds to thallium in the gut and prevents it from being absorbed. Take 2 capsules before every meal. It will buy you time. It will keep you alive." Then she pressed the small black button into my hand. "And this," she said, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity, "is a long-range listening device. It connects to the cloud. You have to go back there, Thomas. You have to let her think she's winning. You have to get her to admit it on tape. We need a confession. We need proof that puts her in prison for life, not just a settlement that lets her walk away." I looked at the small device. It felt heavy like a grenade. She was asking me to go back into the house with the woman who was murdering me. She was asking me to eat at her table and sleep in her bed while she plotted my death. "Can you do it?" Emily asked, gripping my arm. "Can you play the victim one last time so we can be the victors?" I closed my hand around the bug. I thought of Marcus dying alone in that room. I thought of Emily scrubbing dishes while Vanessa bought Cartier bracelets. The fear in my chest was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I will do it," I said, pocketing the device. "Good," Emily said. "Because tonight you are not just fighting for your life. You are fighting for my father's justice. Now go. And Thomas, do not drink the smoothie." The drive back from Emily's apartment felt like a funeral procession, but this time I was both the corpse and the undertaker. I had the Prussian blue pills rattling in my pocket, and a plan that was so reckless it made my hands sweat on the steering wheel. I needed to get inside the house, and I needed to get eyes on the enemy. I pulled into the driveway and immediately called Sam. Sam was a retired electrician who had wired my first warehouse 40 years ago. He was the kind of man who didn't ask questions and who valued loyalty over money. I told him I needed a favor, and I told him to bring his unmarked van. When I walked through the front door, Vanessa was already waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed and her foot tapping a restless rhythm on the marble floor. "Where have you been, Thomas?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You missed lunch. You know you need to eat at regular intervals to keep your strength up." I rubbed my temples, feigning a headache. "The internet is down at the office," I lied smoothly. "I came home to work, but the connection here is spotty too. I called an old contact to come take a look at the wiring. He should be here any minute." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "We have a service contract with the provider, Thomas. Why would you call some random repairman?" "Because the provider can't come until Tuesday," I snapped, letting a bit of my real frustration bleed into the performance. And I have a business to run, Vanessa. Unlike you, I cannot spend my days lounging around waiting for appointments." She stiffened at the insult, but before she could retort, the doorbell rang. It was Sam. He played his part perfectly, wearing a faded blue jumpsuit and carrying a toolbox that looked like it had survived a war. I ushered him in, ignoring Vanessa's disdainful look as she surveyed his muddy work boots. "I need to check the main router in the study," Sam said, his voice gravelly and professional. "And then I need to check the repeaters in the master bedroom and the kitchen." Vanessa's head snapped up. "The bedroom. Why do you need to go in there?" "Signal strength, ma'am," Sam said, not even looking at her. "The walls in these big houses are thick. If the wiring in the ceiling is corroded, it affects the whole grid." "Fine," she said coldly. "But I am watching you. I do not like strangers wandering around my personal space." She followed us like a shadow. We started in the study where Sam made a show of testing the voltage. Then we moved to the kitchen. Every time Sam opened his toolbox, Vanessa leaned in watching his hands. She was terrified we would find her stash of poison, or perhaps she was just naturally controlling. Either way, I knew we would never get the camera installed in the bedroom with her hovering like that. The bedroom was the kill zone. It was where she mixed the drinks, where she talked to Gavin late at night. I needed that camera in the smoke detector directly above the bed. We moved to the master bedroom. The air in there felt heavy and suffocating. Sam set up his ladder under the smoke detector. "I need to check the wiring behind this unit," he grunted. Vanessa took a step forward. "Be careful with the paint," she warned. "That ceiling was hand-finished." I looked at Sam. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He had the camera ready in his palm, but he couldn't install it while she was staring directly at him. I had to act. I had to use the very weapon she was using against me. My health. I let out a low groan and grabbed the doorframe. I squeezed my eyes shut and let my knees buckle slightly. Vanessa cried out, turning away from Sam instantly. "My chest!" I gasped, clutching my shirt. "It feels tight. I need my water." She hesitated. She looked at me and then she looked back at Sam on the ladder. But the instinct to play the devoted nurse was too strong, or perhaps she just wanted to make sure I didn't die before the weekend. "Sit down," she ordered, guiding me to the armchair in the corner. "I will get your water. Do not move." She rushed out of the room toward the kitchen. As soon as her footsteps faded into the hallway, I straightened up and looked at Sam. Now I hissed. Sam moved with the speed of a man half his age. He popped the cover off the smoke detector. He didn't just place a bug, he swapped the entire internal circuit board with a pre-assembled unit he had brought. It contained a high-definition camera and a microphone that could pick up a whisper from across the room. "Hurry, Sam," I whispered, listening for the click of her heels on the hardwood floor. He snapped the cover back on and wiped the plastic with a rag to remove his fingerprints. He was climbing down the ladder, just as Vanessa appeared in the doorway, holding a glass of water. "Here, drink this," she said, breathless. I took the glass and pretended to take a long sip. In reality, I let the water barely touch my lips. I looked up at Sam, who was folding his ladder. "All done here, ma'am," Sam said. "It was just a loose connection. You should have full signal now." Vanessa ignored him and focused on me. "Is the pain gone?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "It is passing," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "I think I just need to rest." She stood there for the moment, and then turned her attention back to the ceiling. She looked up at the smoke detector. My heart, which had been racing for show, actually stopped beating for a terrifying second. She stared at the little white plastic disc. She squinted. The camera lens was microscopic, hidden in the dark sensor gap, but Vanessa had the eyes of a hawk. She took a step toward the ladder which Sam was holding. "It looks crooked," she said. Sam froze. I adjusted it myself, ma'am, he said calmly. It is perfectly level. She hummed a low sound of dissatisfaction. She walked around the ladder viewing the detector from different angles. The silence in the room was absolute. I gripped the armrests of the chair so hard I thought the leather would tear. If she saw it, if she climbed up there and opened it, everything was over. She would know I knew, and she would not wait for the weekend. She would finish me right here and call Gavin to clean up the mess. Finally, she shrugged and turned away. I suppose it is fine, she said dismissively. You can go now. Show him out, Thomas. I let out a breath that I felt I had been holding for 10 years. I walked Sam to the door. I wanted to shake his hand. I wanted to thank him for risking his neck, but I couldn't. Vanessa was watching from the top of the stairs. Send me the bill, I said gruffly, playing the part of the annoyed homeowner. Sam nodded and walked out to his van. I closed the heavy front door and locked it. I felt a surge of triumph. We had done it. The eyes and ears, ahs, were in place. Now I just had to wait for them to slip up. I turned around to head back to the study, but Vanessa was standing right behind me. She had come down the stairs silently. Her face was unreadable. I do not like him, she said, pointing at the closed door. He is just a worker, Vanessa, I said, trying to keep my voice bored. He did the job. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. He looked nervous, and his hands were too clean for a repairman. I felt a cold prickle of sweat on my neck. You are being paranoid, I said. Maybe, she said, stepping closer to me. But I didn't survive this long by being careless, Thomas. I do not trust that wiring job. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I'm going to call the security company in the morning, she said, casually tapping on the screen. I will have them send their senior technician over tomorrow to sweep the house and check all the sensors, just to be safe. We cannot have any electrical fires, can we? She smiled that sweet, deadly smile and walked past me toward the kitchen. I stood there frozen in the hallway. Tomorrow. She was going to have the house swept tomorrow. Professional security technicians would find the camera in 5 minutes. I looked at the grandfather clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. I had thought I had weeks to gather evidence, but I didn't. I had less than 24 hours. I had to get the confession tonight. Or by this time tomorrow, I would be dead, and the only proof of her guilt would be found by the very people she paid to hide it. I had to accelerate the timeline. I had to force her hand, and I knew exactly how to do it. I touched the pocket where the Prussian blue pills were hidden. It was time to play the final hand of poker. I sat in my parked car 2 blocks away from the only home I had known for 15 years, shrouded in the gathering dusk of a rainy Seattle evening. The engine was off, and the windows were beginning to fog up from my heavy breaths, but my eyes were glued to the tablet resting on the passenger seat. The screen glowed with the grainy black and white feed from the camera Sam had just installed in my bedroom smoke detector. It was a strange, voyeuristic feeling watching my own sanctuary from a distance like a ghost haunting his own life. The room was empty for now, silent and still, but I knew the players were about to take the stage. I had told Vanessa I was going to the office to retrieve some files and that I would be late. It was the perfect alibi to give them the freedom they craved. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, the bedroom door opened. Vanessa walked in not with the confident stride she used in public, but with a frantic, excited energy I had never seen before. She was followed closely by Gavin. Seeing them together in my private space made my stomach churn with a nausea that had nothing to do with the poison in my veins. They didn't even wait for the door to close before they were in each other's arms. It wasn't an embrace of affection. It was an embrace of conspirators celebrating a successful heist. I watched as Gavin pulled back and looked at her, his face twisted in a grin that made him look demonic in the low light of the camera feed. Is he really gone? Gavin asked, his voice coming through the tiny microphone crystal clear. Yes, Vanessa laughed, a sound that was sharp and jagged. He went to the office. The old fool thinks he can save his company. He doesn't realize he won't be around to run it by next month. She walked over to the large painting of a ship that hung on the far wall. I watched in frozen horror as she reached behind the frame and pressed a hidden mechanism I thought only I knew about. The painting swung open, revealing the wall safe. My safe. The one that held the deeds to the house, my will, and the life insurance policy I had taken out 20 years ago to protect my family. I had changed the combination last week thinking I was being clever. But as I watched Vanessa's fingers fly over the keypad, I realized there were no secrets in my house. Beep, beep, beep. The heavy steel door clicked open. She reached in and pulled out a thick blue folder. She waved it in the air like a trophy. Here it is, she crowed. The insurance policy. $5 million tax-free, plus the house, plus the liquid assets. Gavin whistled low and impressed. He walked over and took the folder from her, flipping through the pages greedily. 23 million, he calculated. That is enough for Monaco Vanessa. That is enough for us to disappear and never look back. We can buy that villa in the south of France we talked about. No more rainy Seattle. No more pretending to care about geriatrics. Vanessa threw her head back and laughed again. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated greed. I earned it, Gavin, she said, her eyes gleaming. I spent 20 years listening to his boring stories about logistics and unions. I spent 20 years changing his bandages and pretending to admire his integrity. I deserve every penny for the performance I put on. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. My integrity. She mocked the very thing that had put clothes on her back and jewels around her neck. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. It wasn't sadness. It was the realization of how utterly alone I had been. I had been living with a viper who saw my life not as a gift, but as a transaction, a long con that was finally paying off. On the screen, the scene shifted. They tossed the folder onto the floor carelessly, as if the document that represented my life's work was nothing more than trash. They moved toward the bed. My bed. The bed where I had nursed Vanessa through the flu. Where we had celebrated anniversaries, where I had thought we were safe. Seeing them fall onto it together, tangled in a mess of limbs and laughter, was the most grotesque thing I had ever witnessed. It wasn't jealousy. Jealousy implies love, and my love for Vanessa had died the moment I saw that safe open. This was revulsion. It was like watching scavengers pick at a carcass before the animal was even dead. I wanted to look away. I wanted to smash the tablet and drive away forever. But I couldn't. I needed this. I needed every second of this footage to ensure they never saw the light of day again. I forced myself to watch, to bear witness to my own humiliation, so that I could forge it into a weapon. After a few minutes, they lay back breathless and triumphant, staring up at the ceiling. They were looking right at the camera, right at me, though they didn't know it. So when do we do it? Gavin asked, tracing a pattern on the duvet. The thallium is working, but it is slow. I am getting impatient, Nessie. Vanessa turned to him, propping herself up on one elbow. Thanksgiving, she said. Next week. It is perfect. We are hosting a dinner. Lots of people. Witnesses. If he collapses in front of 20 people and you are there to try to save him, no one will question it. It will look like a tragic sudden heart failure brought on by the excitement of the holiday. Thanksgiving. The holiday of gratitude. The irony was so thick it choked me. But we need a trigger, Gavin said. We need something to push his heart over the edge instantly. The slow drip isn't enough for a public spectacle. Vanessa smiled a smile that chilled me to the bone. I have that covered, she said. You know that bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1985. He has been saving for a special occasion. He talks about it all the time. He says he wants to open it when he retires. Yes, Gavin said. Well, he is going to open it on Thanksgiving, Vanessa said. And I am going to make sure that bottle is spiked with a lethal dose. 1 glass, Gavin. That is all it will take. 1 glass of his favorite wine, and Thomas Sterling will be history." Gavin laughed and kissed her forehead. "Brilliant," he said. "A toast to the end of Thomas." I reached out and turned off the tablet screen, plunging the car back into darkness. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a cold, calculated rage. Thanksgiving. They had set the date. They had chosen the weapon. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my life. But they were wrong. They had just given me the script for their own destruction. I started the car, the engine growling in the quiet street. I wasn't going to the office. I was going to prepare for a feast. And I would make sure that at this Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey wouldn't be the only thing getting carved up. The rain was coming down harder now, washing away the grime of the city, but it could not wash away the filth I had just witnessed on that tablet screen. I drove to a nondescript office building near the port, where the neon sign simply read, "Miller Investigations." This was the war room. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Emily was already there, sitting on a folding chair, with her arms crossed, looking at the large monitor on the wall. Next to her is Detective Miller, a man I had hired based on his reputation for handling cases that the police would not touch until it was too late. He was a former homicide detective who had been pushed out of the force for being too thorough, and right now he was looking at the footage of my wife and her lover with a grim expression. I walked in and threw the tablet onto the desk. "You saw it?" I asked, my voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. Miller nodded slowly. "I saw it. Thomas. We have breaking and entering. We have conspiracy. We have adultery. It is enough to get a restraining order and maybe start a fraud investigation. But it is not enough for attempted murder. Not yet." Emily stood up, her eyes blazing with the same fire that had consumed her father. "The toxicology report is ready," she said, handing me a folder. "The levels in your hair match the residue in the vial. We know it is thallium. We know they are doing it. But a defense attorney will tear this apart. They will say you exposed yourself to chemicals at your logistics warehouses. They will say the vial was planted. Without a confession or a direct link to the poison purchase, we might lose." I looked at the two of them, the young scientist and the old detective. They were looking at me for direction. I was the general of this small army, and I knew exactly what battle plan we needed. "I do not want a restraining order," I said quietly, leaning over the desk. "I want them in handcuffs. I want them to rot in a cell for the rest of their lives. And to do that, we need to give them exactly what they want." "We need a catalyst," Miller said, rubbing his chin. "Something that forces them to act before they are ready. Something that makes them reckless." I pulled out my phone. "I have the perfect bait. Vanessa is greedy, Miller. She is not killing me for love or hate. She is killing me for math. She has calculated exactly how much I am worth, and she is tired of waiting for the payout, so we are going to accelerate the timeline." I dialed Harrison's number. It was late, but for the amount of money I paid him annually, he would answer. He picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. "Harrison," I said, cutting off his greeting, "I need you to draft a new will, right now." There was a silence on the line. "Thomas, it is 10 at night. Can this not wait until morning?" "No," I said firmly. "I want a draft sent to my home printer immediately. I want it to state that due to my rapidly declining health and the devoted care of my wife, I am leaving 100% of my assets, including the company, the properties, and the offshore accounts, to Vanessa Sterling. I am removing all charitable donations. I am removing the board of directors' oversight. It is all hers. Effective immediately upon my death." Harrison gasped. "Thomas, are you sure? That is reckless. You have always been cautious about estate planning." Just do it, Harrison, I ordered, and mark it as a draft. I want to review it tonight. I hung up and looked at Miller. He was smiling a slow, dangerous smile. You are going to let her find it, he said. Exactly, I replied. She thinks I am weak. She thinks my mind is going. If she sees a will that gives her everything, she will be terrified that I might die before I sign it. Or worse, that I might change my mind if I get better. She will want to lock in that profit as soon as possible. We spent the next hour refining the plan. Emily would coordinate with the police contact Miller knew, ensuring a SWAT team would be on standby near the house. Miller would monitor the audio feeds. I would go back into the lion's den and play the part of the dying king. I drove back to the house under the cover of darkness. The lights were off downstairs. Vanessa and Gavin had likely finished their celebration, and Gavin would have slipped out the back. I entered quietly and went straight to my study. The printer had already spat out the document Harrison had sent. It lay there in the output tray looking like a standard legal document, but to me it was a bear trap. I took a red pen and made a few scribbles in the margins. I wrote things like, "Yes, excellent," and "add jewelry clause." I wanted it to look like I had been reviewing it with a clear intent to sign. I left it right in the center of my mahogany desk under a heavy brass paperweight. It was the first thing anyone would see if they walked into the room. Then I went upstairs to the guest room and lay down. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. I was waiting for the morning. I was waiting for the inevitable. The next morning, I left the house early, claiming I had a doctor's appointment with a specialist in the city. I knew Vanessa would not be able to resist snooping in my study once I was gone. She always checked my desk. It was part of her routine to see if I had received any letters from the bank or the lawyer. I parked the car in the same spot as the night before, 2 blocks away, and pulled up the camera feed on my tablet. The study camera was perfectly positioned. I watched as the sun streamed through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. At 9:30, the door opened. Vanessa walked in holding a cup of coffee. She looked relaxed, wearing a silk robe and humming to herself. She walked around the desk, trailing her hand along the edge. Then she stopped. Her eyes had landed on the document. I zoomed in on the screen. I saw the exact moment her breath caught in her throat. She set the coffee down so hard it splashed onto the wood, but she didn't care. She snatched the paper up, her eyes scanning the legal jargon frantically. "I leave everything, solely to my wife, Vanessa Sterling." She read it out loud, her voice trembling. She flipped to the last page where my handwritten notes were. She traced the words, "add jewelry clause," with her finger. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He is actually doing it. The old fool is giving me everything." She dropped the paper and fumbled for her phone. She dialed a number and put it on speaker, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "Gavin, pick up," she hissed. Finally, the line connected. "What is it, Nessie?" "I am with a patient." "Screw the patient," she screamed. "You need to hear this. Thomas drafted a new will. He is leaving it all to me, Gavin. Everything. No trust fund, no charity. It is all mine." There was a pause on the line. Then Gavin's voice came through, thick with greed. "Are you sure? Is it signed?" "Not yet," she said, looking at the paper again. "It is a draft. He has notes on it. He is planning to finalize it soon." "Soon isn't good enough," Gavin said sharply. "If he dies before he signs that, we are back to the old will, which gives half to that stupid foundation. We need him to sign it." "No." Vanessa interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "You do not understand. The draft is dated today. If he dies suddenly, we can contest the old will using this draft as proof of his final intent. Harrison drafted it. It is in the system. But we cannot risk him changing his mind. He is moody, Gavin. He has been acting strange. What if he wakes up tomorrow and decides to leave it to a cat shelter?" "So what are you saying?" Gavin asked. I am saying we do not wait for Thanksgiving, she said. That is too far away. He might get better. The pills might wear off, or he might get suspicious. We need to do it now while he is weak and sentimental. When Gavin asked. Saturday, she said decisively. This Saturday. I will tell him I am throwing him a surprise early birthday party. Just a few close friends. You come over. We will do the wine toast then. Saturday. Gavin hesitated. That is in 2 days, Vanessa. I have to prepare the dose. Just do it, she snapped. I want him gone by Sunday morning. I want to be a widow by the time the banks open on Monday. She hung up the phone and looked at the will one last time. She brought the paper to her lips and kissed it. Happy birthday, Thomas, she whispered to the empty room. I sat in my car feeling a cold chill settle over me. Saturday. I had 48 hours. The game had changed. They were not just hunting me anymore. They were rushing toward the finish line. But they didn't know that by moving up the date they had just walked directly into the center of my crosshairs. I picked up my phone and called Miller. Get the team ready, I said. The party is on Saturday, and tell the police to bring extra handcuffs. Saturday arrived with a gray, heavy sky that seemed to press down on the roof of the mansion, but inside the house was ablaze with light and artificial cheer. Vanessa had outdone herself. She had transformed the living room into a stage set for a grand tragedy, although to the guests arriving in their luxury sedans, it looked like a celebration of life. I sat in my wheelchair near the fireplace, a plaid blanket draped over my legs to hide the fact that my muscles were actually tense and ready to spring. I played the part of the fading patriarch perfectly. I let my head loll slightly to the side and kept my eyes half closed, watching the room through a haze of feigned exhaustion. Vanessa moved through the crowd like a butterfly in a silk dress, touching arms, laughing at jokes, and constantly checking her watch. She had not just invited friends. She had curated a jury. Standing by the bar was Chief Anderson, the retired head of the Seattle Police Department, a man whose testimony would be unimpeachable in a coroner's inquest. Next to him was Robert Sterling, my cousin and business partner, a man who was too loud and too drunk to notice details, but who would loudly proclaim how much Vanessa loved me. There were 20 people in total, 20 witnesses who would swear under oath that Thomas Sterling had simply collapsed from a weak heart, surrounded by the people who loved him. It was a brilliant plan. If I died here in front of the pillars of the community, no one would dare accuse the grieving widow of foul play. I watched Gavin working the room. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him too well, playing the role of the concerned family doctor. He stayed close to the drinks, monitoring the flow of alcohol, making sure everyone was relaxed and distracted. Every few minutes, his eyes would dart to Vanessa, and they would share a micro-expression of anticipation. They were like children waiting to open a present on Christmas morning. Only the present was my corpse, and the wrapping paper was a body bag. Thomas. I looked up to see Chief Anderson standing over me, a glass of scotch in his hand. You are looking a bit tired, old friend, he boomed, his voice too loud for my sensitive ears. But Vanessa tells me you are in good spirits. She says you have been planning to hand over the reins of the company. I forced a weak smile and coughed into my hand a dry rattle that I had practiced in the mirror. Time catches up to us all. Anderson, I wheezed. Vanessa has been my rock. I do not know what I would do without her. Anderson nodded solemnly, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. She is a good woman, Thomas. You are lucky. Make sure you take care of her in that will of yours. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. I am taking care of her, I thought. I am taking care of her right into a prison cell. Excuse me, gentlemen. Vanessa appeared at my side, her hand resting possessively on the handle of my wheelchair. She smelled of expensive jasmine perfume, the same scent she had worn on our wedding day. It is almost time for the toast, she said, smiling at Anderson. Thomas has a very special bottle he has been saving. A Chateau Margaux 1985. He insisted we open it tonight, since all his favorite people are here. She looked down at me, her eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory light. "Shall I prepare it for you, darling?" she crooned. "You know it needs to breathe for a few minutes to really open up." "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. "Please, Nessie, do the honors." She patted my cheek, a gesture that felt like a brand, and walked toward the sidebar, where the expensive wine sat on a silver tray. The room was loud, filled with the chatter of 20 people, but to me, the world narrowed down to that sidebar. I watched her back. She positioned herself carefully, blocking the view of the room with her body. But she forgot about the mirror on the wall behind the bar. And she certainly didn't know about the focus of the old man in the wheelchair. I watched her pick up the corkscrew. She opened the bottle efficiently, the cork popping with a sound that was lost in the noise of the party. Then I saw it. Her right hand dipped into the pocket of her dress. It moved so fast that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. She pulled out a small clear vial, not much bigger than a lipstick. With a quick flick of her wrist, she uncorked the vial and tipped it over the open neck of the wine bottle. The clear liquid vanished into the dark red vintage wine instantly. There was no fizz, no change in color, just a silent, lethal addition to a masterpiece of winemaking. She swirled the bottle, gently mixing the thallium with the tannins and the alcohol. It was done. The weapon was loaded. She turned around, holding the bottle like a trophy. "Gavin," she called out, her voice bright and commanding. "Why don't you help me pour? We want to make sure everyone gets a glass for the big toast." Gavin hurried over, his eyes locking onto the bottle. He knew. I could see the tension in his jaw. He took the bottle from her, and their fingers brushed for a second, a secret handshake of murderers. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was the burner phone. It was time. I could not let them pour that wine. If anyone else drank from that bottle by mistake, an innocent person would die. This had to end now. I let out a groan and shifted in my chair, gripping the armrest. "Vanessa," I rasped loud enough for the people nearby to hear. She froze halfway to the table with the glasses. "What is it, Thomas? Are you in pain?" I need the restroom," I said, playing up the embarrassment. "Just for a moment. Before the toast." She looked annoyed. A flash of irritation crossed her face. She wanted to get this over with. But she couldn't refuse a sick man his basic dignity in front of an audience. "Of course, darling," she said, signaling to Gavin. "Gavin, help him to the guest bathroom in the hall." "No," I said sharply. "I can manage. I just need to. I can walk a little. It is good for my circulation." I pushed myself up from the wheelchair, my legs shaking. The room went quiet as everyone watched the struggle of the old man. I took a few wobbly steps, leaning heavily on my cane. "I will be right back," I said to the room. "Save the wine for me." I shuffled out of the living room and into the hallway. As soon as I closed the heavy oak door of the guest bathroom behind me, I dropped the act. I stood up straight, my muscles locking into place. I turned the lock with a definitive click. I moved to the sink and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The eyes staring back were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a judge. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the burner phone. My thumb hovered over the message I had already typed out. "Green light. The wine is spiked. Move in." I pressed send. I watched the little progress bar fill up. Sent. It was done. Somewhere 2 streets away, Miller was giving the signal. The SWAT team was moving into position. The unmarked cars were rolling silently toward the driveway. I put the phone back in my pocket and took a deep breath. I looked around the bathroom. This was the last moment of peace I would have for a long time. When I opened this door, the hurricane would hit. My marriage, my reputation, the quiet life I had built it, would all be blown away. But what would remain would be the truth. I heard footsteps outside on the hardwood floor. They were light and quick. Then came a soft, rhythmic knocking on the door. Knock, knock. An yo rangwai diket den dong du roy. Den jo hui ru roy. Her voice came through the wood, sweet as molasses, but heavy with an underlying command. It was the voice of a siren calling a sailor to the rocks. She was inviting me to my own execution. She was standing there holding a glass of poison, smiling at the door, waiting for me to come out and die so she could be rich. I unlocked the door. I gripped the handle of my cane not for support, but as a weapon. I opened the door and looked into the face of my wife. She was beaming, holding 2 crystal glasses. "Ready?" she asked. I looked past her toward the front door, where the blue lights were just beginning to flash through the transom window. "Yes, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I am ready." The dining room was a masterpiece of deception, illuminated by the soft glow of a dozen beeswax candles and the sparkle of the crystal chandelier overhead. Vanessa had arranged the seating chart with the precision of a military strategist, placing the most influential guests closest to me so they would have a front-row seat to my demise. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a king presiding over his final court. To my right sat Chief Anderson, his face flushed with good bourbon and laughter. To my left was Robert, my loud-mouthed cousin, who was currently recounting a fishing story that everyone had heard 1,000 times. And hovering near the sideboard like a vulture in a bespoke suit was Dr. Gavin Reed. He was not eating. He claimed he had a sensitive stomach, but I knew the truth. Nerves were eating him alive. He kept checking his watch and glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the minutes until he could pronounce me dead. The dinner itself was exquisite. Roast duck with fig sauce, truffle, mashed potatoes, and glazed carrots. It was my favorite meal. Vanessa had thought of everything. She wanted my Last Supper to be perfect. She wanted the narrative to be that I died happy, full, and surrounded by love. Every time a guest looked my way, I forced a smile. I nodded at their stories. I laughed at their jokes, though the sound rasped in my throat. Inside my chest, my heart was beating a steady drum of war. I looked at the faces around the table. These were my friends, my family, my business partners. They were eating my food and drinking my wine, completely oblivious to the fact that they were extras in a snuff film. They saw a devoted wife doting on her ailing husband. I saw a black widow spinning her web. Chief Anderson tapped his glass with a silver spoon, bringing the room to a hush. The clatter of silverware stopped. 20 faces turned toward me. "I would like to propose a toast," Anderson boomed, standing up. "To Thomas Sterling, a titan of industry, a loyal friend, and a man who has built a legacy that will outlast us all. We were worried about you, old friend, but seeing you tonight surrounded by family brings joy to my heart. To your health, Thomas." To Thomas, the room echoed in unison. They raised their glasses of champagne. I nodded, acknowledging the tribute. If only they knew how short that health was scheduled to last. "Thank you, everyone," I said, my voice projecting surprisingly well for a dying man. "It means the world to me to have you all here." Vanessa stood up then. She looked radiant in her crimson dress, the color of fresh blood. She walked to the sidebar where the bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1985, sat breathing. She had already decanted it. The dark red liquid swirled in the crystal vessel, heavy and rich. "As you all know," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "Thomas has been saving this specific bottle for a very special occasion. It is a vintage 1985, the year we met." She lied effortlessly. "We met in 1995, but no one here knew the difference. Because there is only one bottle, and because Thomas is the guest of honor tonight, he will be the only one drinking this special vintage. The rest of us will have to settle for the house Cabernet." A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. It was a clever move. It ensured that no one else would accidentally take a sip of the poison. It isolated the target perfectly. Vanessa picked up the decanter. She walked toward me, the heavy crystal in her hand. The room watched in respectful silence as she poured the wine into my large goblet. The liquid splashed against the glass, dark and ominous. It looked innocent. It looked delicious. But I knew that swimming within those complex notes of oak and blackberry was a lethal dose of thallium. She set the decanter down and picked up the glass. She held it with both hands, as if it were a holy grail. She leaned down close to my ear, so only I could hear the venom in her sweetness, but loud enough that the guests saw an intimate moment between husband and wife. "Happy 70th birthday, my love," she whispered. "Drink up. You have earned a long rest." She placed the glass in my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. She stepped back, standing next to Gavin, who had moved closer. His eyes locked onto the glass in my hand. He was gripping his linen napkin so tightly that his knuckles were white. He was sweating. He knew that once I drank this, there was no turning back. In 5 minutes, I would be gasping for air. In 10, I would be gone. I looked at the glass. The wine was a deep ruby red, catching the candlelight. I swirled it gently. The aroma wafted up to my nose. Underneath the rich scent of the grapes, I smelled it. Or perhaps I imagined it. A faint metallic tang. The scent of betrayal. The scent of a marriage that had rotted from the inside out. The room was silent. They were all waiting. It is a social contract. When a toast is made and a special drink is poured, everyone waits for the honoree to take the first sip. Chief Anderson was watching me with a benevolent smile. Robert was watching with glazed eyes. Vanessa and Gavin were watching with the hunger of wolves. I lifted the glass slowly. My hand did not shake. I brought the rim to my lips. I saw Vanessa's breath hitch. I saw Gavin take a small, involuntary step forward. They were mentally urging me on. Drink. Drink, die. I held the glass there right under my nose for a long second. The tension in the room was palpable, although the guests thought it was just the solemnity of the moment. I looked over the rim of the glass directly into Vanessa's eyes. I saw the anticipation turn to confusion as I paused. Why wasn't I drinking? Why was I staring at her? Then I lowered the glass. I set it down on the table with a definitive clink that sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. I did not let go of the stem. I kept my hand on it, anchoring it to the table. Vanessa's smile faltered. A flicker of panic darted across her face. "Is something wrong, darling?" she asked, her voice tight. "Is it not breathing enough?" "No," I said loudly, my voice strong and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "The wine is perfect, Vanessa. It has a very distinct bouquet. One might say it is a killer vintage." I saw Gavin flinch, but I continued, turning my gaze to the gathered crowd. "Before I enjoy this final drink, I have a little surprise. You see, birthdays are not just about receiving gifts. They are about sharing memories. And I have found some very special memories that I think we should all share together tonight." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. It was not for the television. It was for the projector system I had secretly had Sam install along with the cameras. Vanessa took a step toward me, her hand reaching out. "Thomas, what are you doing? We are in the middle of a toast." "Sit down, Vanessa," I ordered. The tone of my voice was not that of a sick old man. It was the voice of the CEO who had crushed competitors for 40 years. It cracked like a whip across the room. She froze. The guests looked around, confused and uncomfortable. Chief Anderson sat up straighter, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. I pointed the remote at the large white wall above the fireplace. "I have a movie to show you," I said. "It is a home movie. It was filmed right here in this house over the last few days. And I think you will all find the plot very interesting, especially the twist ending." I pressed the red button. The lights in the dining room dimmed automatically. The projector hummed to life, beaming a bright rectangle of light onto the wall. Vanessa looked at Gavin. Gavin looked at the door. But it was too late. The show was about to begin. The beam of the projector cut through the darkness like a lighthouse in a storm, illuminating the white wall above the fireplace with a grainy but crystal-clear image. It was the master bedroom. My bedroom. The timestamp in the corner of the screen showed that this footage was recorded only 2 days ago. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the whir of the cooling fan in the projector and the amplified audio booming from the hidden speakers. On the screen, Vanessa and Gavin were lying on my bed, tangles of limbs and laughter. But it was not their infidelity that made the air in the dining room turn to ice. It was their words. "I want it to be over," Gavin said on the screen, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the dining room. "I am tired of waiting," Vanessa's voice replied, sharp and cold. "Saturday. We do it Saturday. I will spike the Chateau Margaux. Just 1 glass, Gavin. That is all it will take. The thallium is already in his system. The wine will be the catalyst. 5 minutes after he drinks, his heart will simply stop. It will look exactly like a cardiac arrest." The video cut to a close-up of Vanessa holding a familiar small vial. "This will kill him," she whispered to the camera she did not know was there. "And then the $23 million is finally ours." The light from the screen flickered over the faces of the guests. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as if their brains refused to process the monstrosity they were witnessing. Then chaos erupted. A woman screamed. Chief Anderson stood up so abruptly, his chair fell backward with a crash. Robert dropped his fork, and it clattered onto his china plate like a gunshot. Vanessa was frozen. She stood there like a statue carved from ice, her face pale in the reflected light of her own crime. The glass of wine she had been holding, the glass meant for me, slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered. The dark red liquid splashed across the hem of her crimson dress, looking for all the world like an arterial spray of blood. "Turn it off!" The scream came from Gavin. He was no longer the composed doctor. He was a cornered animal. His eyes were wide with panic and madness. He looked at the projector sitting on the side table, and then he looked at me. I said, "Turn it off," he roared. He lunged toward the projector, his hands reaching out to smash the machine that was destroying his life. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and terror. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that the man in the wheelchair was not the invalid he had diagnosed. I threw off the plaid blanket that had been covering my legs. I planted my feet on the floor. I did not struggle to rise. I did not wobble. I stood up with the explosive power of a man who had been suppressing his rage for months. I reached out and grabbed my heavy oak cane, not to lean on it, but to wield it. As Gavin rushed past me, I swung the cane. It was a precise, calculated strike. The heavy wood connected with his kneecap with a sickening crack that was louder than the screams of the guests. Gavin howled in pain. His leg buckled under him, and he crashed to the floor, writhing and clutching his knee. He looked up at me in disbelief, his face twisted in agony. "You," he gasped. "You can stand!" I towered over him. I felt 10 feet tall. I felt the strength of justice flowing through my veins, pushing back the poison. "I can do more than stand." "Gavin," I said, my voice booming over the commotion, "I can fight." I stepped over his groaning body and turned my attention to the main villain. Vanessa was backing away, slowly shaking her head, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. The guests had formed a semicircle blocking her path, their faces masks of horror and judgment. "Thomas," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Thomas, please. It is a misunderstanding. It is a deepfake. You know, with AI these days they can fake anything." I laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound. "A deepfake," I repeated, walking toward her. I reached down to the table and picked up the decanter of wine. The liquid swirled inside, dark and deadly. I held it out toward her. "If it is a fake, Vanessa, then there is nothing to fear," I said. If this is just innocent wine, then prove it. I poured a fresh glass. My hand was steady. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space until I could smell the fear radiating off her skin. I shoved the glass into her hand. She recoiled, but I grabbed her wrist, forcing her to hold it. "Drink it," I commanded. The room went silent again. The tension was suffocating. 50 eyes were glued to Vanessa. "Drink it," I yelled, my voice cracking with emotion. "You wanted to celebrate my birthday, right? You wanted a toast. So drink. Show everyone here how much you love your husband." Vanessa stared at the wine. Her hand was shaking so violently that the liquid sloshed over the rim, staining her fingers. She knew exactly what was in there. She knew that if she took one sip, her nervous system would start to shut down. She looked at the wine, then she looked at me. I cannot," she whispered. "Why not?" I asked, leaning in closer. "Is it because of the vintage? Or is it because of the thallium?" "Don't make me do this," she sobbed. "Drink it," I roared, pushing the glass toward her lips. "No." She screamed the word, and with a sudden violent motion, she slapped the glass away. It flew across the room and smashed against the fireplace, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. She stood there, chest heaving, panting like a wild beast. The mask had finally fallen completely. The sweet, devoted wife was gone. In her place was a woman consumed by hatred and greed. She looked at me, and for the first time she didn't try to hide the loathing in her eyes. "Yes," she shrieked, her voice piercing the air. "Yes, I did it. Are you happy now, you miserable old bastard?" The confession hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence. Even Gavin on the floor stopped moaning. "I wanted you dead," she screamed, spitting the words at me. "I have wanted you dead for 10 years. Do you think I loved you? Look at you. You are old. You are boring. You are a walking wallet. I spent my youth changing your bandages and listening to your pathetic stories about the good old days. I earned that money, Thomas. I earned every single cent." She took a step toward me, her face twisted into a snarl. "You were supposed to die quietly," she hissed. "You were supposed to just go to sleep and leave me in peace. But you are so selfish. You are so stubborn you wouldn't even die right. You had to drag this out. You had to make me the villain." I stood my ground, looking at this stranger I had shared my life with. I felt a strange sense of calm. The pain was gone. The doubt was gone. "I did not make you the villain, Vanessa," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." She laughed, a manic sound that bordered on hysteria. "And I would do it again," she yelled, throwing her arms out, addressing the horrified crowd. "Look at him. He is a miser. He sits on millions while I have to beg for an allowance. He cares more about his legacy than he cares about me. Yes, I poisoned him. And my only regret is that I didn't use a higher dose." She was panting, her eyes wild, daring anyone to challenge her. She thought she was justifying herself. She thought she was the victim. But as she looked around the room, she saw only revulsion. She saw her friends, her social circle, her allies, all looking at her as if she were a monster. And in the back of the room, standing by the door, she finally saw what I had seen minutes ago. The blue uniforms of the police officers who had silently entered during the video and witnessed every single word. The double doors of the dining room burst open with a force that rattled the crystal in the cabinets. It was not a polite entry. It was a raid. A dozen officers in tactical gear swarmed into the room, their voices barking commands that cut through the stunned silence like knives. "Police, nobody move hands where we can see them." The guests who had just been witnesses to a confession were now witnesses to a takedown. They scrambled back, overturning chairs and pressing themselves against the silk wallpaper, terrified of being caught in the crossfire. But the police knew exactly who they were looking for. They did not look at the retired police chief or the wealthy business partners. Their weapons and their attention were focused squarely on the woman in the red dress and the man groaning on the floor. Two officers hauled Gavin up by his armpits. He screamed as his shattered knee dragged across the floor, but there was no sympathy in their eyes. They slammed him against the wall, pinning him there, while they slapped the cuffs on his wrists. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of my safety being locked in and his freedom being locked out. Vanessa stood frozen in the center of the room. She looked small now, surrounded by the men in uniform. The arrogance that had fueled her screaming rant just moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind a trembling shell of a woman. An officer approached her, holding out the handcuffs. "Vanessa Sterling, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Thomas Sterling and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." She did not remain silent. She let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. "No, this is a mistake. He is lying. He is the one who is crazy. Look at him, he is standing. He faked being sick." The officer ignored her, spinning her around and pulling her arms behind her back. She struggled, kicking out with her expensive heels, but it was useless. The cold steel snapped around her wrists, binding her to the consequences of her actions. Her perfectly styled hair was falling in disarray around her face, and her mascara was beginning to run, creating black tear tracks down her pale cheeks. She looked at the guests, searching for a friendly face, searching for someone to save her. "Help me," she pleaded, looking at Chief Anderson. "Bob, tell them. Tell them I am a good wife. Tell them I took care of him." Chief Anderson looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. He slowly turned his back on her, facing the wall. It was a rejection more painful than any slap. One by one, the other guests did the same. They turned away, refusing to meet the eyes of the woman who had tried to poison their friend. She was alone in a room full of people. Then the crowd at the door parted, and a young woman walked in. She was not wearing a ball gown. She was wearing a simple coat and carrying a sterile evidence box. It was Emily. She walked into that dining room like she owned it. She didn't look at the expensive furniture or the shocked socialites. She walked straight to the fireplace where the smashed remains of the wine glass lay. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully began collecting the shards, placing them into evidence bags. Then she moved to the table. She picked up the decanter of Chateau Margaux, sealing the top with tape. She picked up the wine glass I had poured for Vanessa. She moved with the precision of a surgeon and the righteousness of an avenging angel. Vanessa saw her, and her eyes went wide with shock. "You," she hissed. "What are you doing here? You are a junkie. Get out of my house." Emily stopped. She held up the bag containing the poisoned wine. She walked over to where Vanessa was being held. She looked the older woman up and down, not with fear, but with a calm, devastating clarity. "I am not a junkie, Vanessa," Emily said, her voice steady. "I am a forensic scientist, and thanks to the sample you just provided in this bottle, and the confession you just screamed for the whole world to hear, I am the person who is going to make sure you never hurt anyone ever again. This is for my father." Vanessa lunged at her, snapping her teeth like a rabid dog, but the officer yanked her back. Emily didn't flinch. She just turned and handed the evidence to the lead detective. "Take it all," Emily said. "The wine, the pills in her purse, the residue on the glass. It is all thallium." I watched it all from my spot by the table. My legs were starting to ache, the adrenaline fading, but my spirit was soaring. I walked over to Vanessa. The officers stepped back slightly, allowing the victim to have his final word. She looked up at me. Her face was a ruin of hatred and despair. The mask of the loving wife was gone forever. "Why," she whispered, "why didn't you just die? It would have been so much easier." I leaned in close so I could look deep into her eyes. "Because I realized something, Vanessa," I said softly. "I realized that my life is worth more than your greed. You thought I was weak because I loved you. You thought I was stupid because I trusted you, but you forgot that I built this life from nothing. I have faced sharks in the boardroom who were scarier than you. I gestured around the opulent room, the room she had wanted to inherit so badly. You wanted the money, I said. You wanted the house. You wanted the prestige. Well, now you are going to be famous, Vanessa. You will be on the front page of every newspaper in Seattle, but not as the grieving widow, as the black widow who failed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the draft of the will she had found, the one that had triggered her rush to murder. I held it up. And this, I said, tearing the paper in half. This was the bait. I never intended to sign it. You fell for it because you are arrogant. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, but you were just playing checkers while I was playing chess. She stared at the torn paper falling to the floor like snow. The reality of her situation finally hit her. She had lost everything. The money, the lover, the freedom. The officer grabbed her arm. "Let's go, ma'am." As they dragged her toward the door, she began to fight again. She dug her heels into the carpet, screaming and thrashing. She twisted her head back to look at me one last time. Her eyes were wide and manic, filled with a terrifying darkness. "You think you won," she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "You think this is victory? Look at you, Thomas. You are an old man. You have no one. Marcus is dead. I am gone. You will rot in this big empty house all by yourself." She laughed, a high-pitched cackling sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You will die alone, Thomas," she shrieked as they pushed her through the doorway. "You will die alone and no one will hear you scream." Her laughter echoed down the hallway, fading into the night as the heavy front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was deafening. The guests stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. I stood in the center of the room, leaning on my cane, listening to the sirens wail in the distance, carrying away the cancer that had been eating at my life. I was alone in the room, but for the first time in years, I did not feel lonely. I felt clean. The judge's gavel came down with a sound that felt more final than a gunshot, marking the end of the darkest chapter of my life. 2 months had passed since the dinner party that exposed the monsters hiding in plain sight. The trial was swift and brutal. With the video evidence and the toxicology reports, neither Vanessa nor Gavin stood a chance. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. I watched from the back of the courtroom as the woman who had shared my bed for 20 years was led away in a jumpsuit that matched the color of her soul. She did not look at me. She just stared ahead, with empty eyes, her beauty stripped away to reveal the hollow shell beneath. I left the courthouse and drove straight to the real estate agent's office. I signed the papers to sell the mansion on the lake. I sold it for less than market value because I wanted it gone. I wanted to erase the stage where they had performed their cruel play. People told me I was crazy to sell a $4 million home so quickly, but they did not understand. That house was not an asset. It was a mausoleum. I moved into a smaller condo in the city with a view of the Space Needle. It is quiet here. Vanessa had cursed me, saying I would die alone and miserable. But as I sat on my balcony drinking coffee that I had brewed myself, knowing with absolute certainty that it was safe, I did not feel lonely. I felt a profound sense of peace. The silence was not empty. It was clean. It was the sound of freedom. I had spent so years surrounded by noise, by fake laughter, and calculated affection that I had forgotten what honesty sounded like. It sounds like the wind. It sounds like your own heartbeat, steady and strong. The next morning I drove out to the cemetery where Marcus was buried. The grass had grown over the fresh earth, and someone had planted marigolds near the headstone. I saw a figure standing there, wrapped in a wool coat against the morning chill. It was Emily. She looked different. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a clarity and strength that reminded me so much of her father. She was holding a single white rose. I walked up beside her, and we stood in silence for a moment, watching the clouds break over the horizon. "He would have been proud of you, Thomas," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the stone. "You did what he could not. You finished the fight." I shook my head. "We finished it, Emily. I would be dead if not for you. Your science saved my life. Your courage gave me a reason to fight." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, looking at me with confusion. "I am not leaving my money to a wife who hates me," I said, "and I am certainly not taking it with me when I go. I have set up a trust. It is called the Truth Foundation. It is fully funded with $5 million to start." Emily opened the envelope, her hands trembling as she pulled out the documents. "The mission is simple," I continued. "We are going to help victims of domestic abuse, specifically those involving financial fraud and medical gaslighting. We are going to provide legal aid, private investigators, and toxicology screenings for people who feel like they are going crazy because their spouses are manipulating them, and I want you to run it." Emily looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Thomas, I cannot run a foundation. I am just a student." "You are not just a student," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are a survivor. You are the daughter of Marcus Vance, and you are the only person I trust in this world. You have the mind for the science, and now you have the resources for the justice. This is your job now, Emily. This is our legacy." She wiped her tears and nodded slowly, a smile breaking through the grief. "We will make them pay," she whispered. "We will make sure no one else dies alone in the dark." Before I handed the keys of the mansion to the new owners, there was one last thing I had to do. I went back to the house one final time, not to reminisce, but to make sure I was leaving nothing of myself behind. The house was empty now, stripped of the furniture and the art. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floors that Vanessa had loved so much. We walked into the kitchen, the place where she had mixed my poison every night. The granite countertops were cold and bare. I stood by the sink, looking out at the spot where I had dumped the toxic smoothies into the fern. The dead plant was gone, removed by the cleaners, but the memory of its sacrifice remained. Emily stood beside me, her presence a comforting weight in the empty room. "Do you miss it?" she asked, looking around at the vaulted ceilings and the view of the lake. I shook my head slowly. "A house is just wood and stone, Emily," I said. "It only becomes a home when there is truth inside it. This place was a theater, and I am tired of acting." We walked out the front door, and I locked it for the last time. As I dropped the keys into the real estate agent's lockbox, I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. It was done. And the work has already begun. Just yesterday, the foundation took its first case. A young man named David contacted us. His partner had convinced him he was losing his memory while she siphoned his inheritance into secret accounts. Thanks to the investigators we hired, we found the paper trail this morning. Hearing the relief in David's voice reminded me why we are doing this. It is not about revenge against Vanessa anymore. It is about ensuring that kindness is never mistaken for weakness again. We are building an army of survivors, one truth at a time. After we closed the file on David's case, Emily and I decided to celebrate not with champagne or caviar, but with burgers at a small diner near the pier. It was the kind of place Marcus and I used to visit 40 years ago, before the logistics empire and the millions changed us. Sitting there in a vinyl booth, watching Emily laugh at a terrible joke I made, I felt a warmth that no amount of money could buy. I looked at her and saw not just a partner in justice, but the daughter I should have had. Vanessa's final curse rang in my ears, saying I would die alone. But as I dipped a fry into ketchup, I realized she was wrong about that too. Loneliness is not being by yourself. Loneliness is sleeping next to a stranger who is sharpening a knife. I am no longer lonely. I have a purpose. I have a family born of shared scars rather than shared DNA. I touched the watch on my wrist, the one Marcus gave me decades ago. I could almost feel him sitting there with us, smiling his crooked smile. The rain outside was washing the city clean, and inside that diner, I was finally free. We stood there for a long time, two people brought together by tragedy, forging a new future over the grave of the man who had brought us together. As I walked back to my car, I realized that Vanessa was wrong about everything. She thought family was about blood and marriage certificates. She thought power was about bank accounts and control. I got into my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw lines of age, yes. I saw the toll that the poison and the stress had taken. But I also saw a fire that had not been there in years. I lost a wife. I lost a doctor I thought was a friend. I lost the illusion of a perfect life. But in the ashes of that destruction, I found something far more valuable. I found my dignity. I found a daughter in spirit, if not in blood. I realized that money is just a tool. It can build a prison or it can build a shield. It all depends on whose hand holds it. And sometimes to truly live, you have to be willing to kill the life you thought you wanted. You have to be willing to burn down the lies, even if they keep you warm. Because the warmth of a lie is just the fever before the death. The cold truth is where life begins. If you are watching this and you have a nagging feeling in your gut, if you feel like you are walking on eggshells in your own home, if your partner makes you feel like you are losing your mind, listen to that voice. That is your survival instinct screaming to be heard. Do not silence it. Do not be like the old Thomas who chose comfort over clarity. Trust your intuition. It is the only thing that will never lie to you. Please like this video and share it with everyone you know. You never know who is suffering in silence. You never know who needs to hear that they can fight back. Let's start a conversation in the comments. Have you ever had to restart your life after a betrayal? How did you find the strength? The biggest lesson I learned from this nightmare is that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones sleeping beside us. We spend our lives guarding against strangers, locking our doors, and installing alarms, but we leave our hearts unlocked for people who view us as resources rather than human beings. True wealth is not the number in your bank account. It is the quality of the people around you. It is better to be alone and safe than to be accompanied by a wolf in sheep's clothing. Protect your peace, protect your sanity, and never apologize for saving yourself. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for more true stories of survival and justice. Together we can shine a light on the truth. Stay safe and stay vigilant.